Well, this is John Black, Super Chemist. We're here to talk about ANACYCLOSIS, and basically that's a theory by a name called Polybius. He's a kind of a Socrates type guy, if you never heard of him. He's a thinker type guy back in the day, and he had this theory about how there's 7 stages of a society, okay? And we're going to get into it. This video on YouTube is called After School. It's spelled S-K-O-O-L though, instead of, regularly. You can watch the whole thing on YouTube or any of his channels. But here we go with Polybius telling us about his theory. Keep in mind, this guy's he's a rich guy. He's an elitist. Probably royal blood, but I don't know.
Is every civilization doomed to rise but then inevitably fall? Is there some ideal form of government that will allow a civilization to avoid collapse? How can we explain why some civilizations flourish and expand while others stagnate or are easily conquered? These are vital questions that humans have pondered for thousands of years, and they remain urgently relevant today. They were also the exact questions that obsessed a man named Polybius, who lived in ancient Greece over 2,000 years ago during the 2nd century BC. While Polybius was a highly educated member of the Greek upper class, for him, these were not just abstract philosophical topics to be debated over a cup of wine, but burning issues of direct and painful relevance, not only to himself personally, but to his home city of Megalopolis and to the entire wider Greek world. This is how and why civilizations rise and fall. Like many ancient thinkers, Polybius believed that civilizations behaved like living creatures and followed a natural biological cycle of birth, growth, maturity, stagnation, decline, and death. The earlier Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, had both expressed versions of this theory. Polybius took these ideas even further and offered a very elaborate scheme. He proposed a cyclical progression of 7 stages of government that form an endless repeating loop called ANACYCLOSIS. He posited that primitive humans had begun in a sort of anarchic original condition without political structures. This is the first stage. Eventually, a strong leader emerges who brings order and direction for the good of all, and thereby gains the respect and fealty of the group. The people willingly bestow the mantle of authority upon him, and thus we reach the 2nd stage of the cycle, kingship. While the original king earned his position of leadership through his actions, the kingship was usually then passed down by heredity. Over time, subsequent monarchs start to grow arrogant and abuse their power through arbitrary or unjust actions, and the kingship degenerates into the 3rd phase, tyranny. This provokes a group of the wealthiest and most dynamic men to organize together and overthrow the tyrant. They then take charge of running the state in a collective fashion, sharing power among themselves, and the 4th phase, aristocracy, is born. While the initial group of aristocrats acts with the interests of all in mind, once again, over subsequent generations, their descendants become addicted to wealth and status and begin to think only of themselves, and aristocracy degenerates into its corrupt form, oligarchy. The ordinary people inevitably grow weary of the abuses of the overbearing oligarchs and reach a point where they can't take it anymore. The people rise up in revolution and either kill or expel the oligarchs. Recalling their ill treatment by tyrants and oligarchs, they desire neither a kingship nor an aristocracy. This inspires them to take up the reins of government themselves and create a democracy in which political power rests in the hands of the people. Equality and freedom of speech typically form two of the cornerstones of democracies. For a time, there is harmony and prosperity, but soon corruption again creeps in. Later generations, who have grown up always enjoying freedom of speech and equality, begin to take these rights for granted and no longer guard or value them. Greed leads to inequality, and affluence fosters a sense of entitlement. Both create resentment among the populace. Deceitful and shameless leaders arise who play upon these feelings by making extravagant promises, vowing to shower the people with gifts. But in reality, these men are only concerned with increasing their own power. With the rise of such power-hungry and narcissistic leaders, often called demagogues, democracy devolves into the next phase, mob rule. At some point, one of the demagogues emerges as dominant over all the others and seizes control of the state, or else there is a general collapse into anarchy, followed by the emergence of a new strongman. Then, the entire cycle repeats itself. This is how Polybius described his doctrine of ANACYCLOSIS. And in his presentation of it, there is indeed an almost biological inevitability to the way in which each stage degenerates into its negative twin. That Polybius would subscribe to this theory is quite understandable, because its general outlines matched up well against the histories of many of the Greek city-states.
Okay, well, here's his example, right? You got the monarchy going into tyranny, but see, and mob rule first, and then you get a king. I understand all that, and you get tyranny because it goes down the line, and you get more and more horrible people. This is the part where I start disagreeing, okay? And they overturn the king, right? And the aristocrats take over, the rich people. See, what he's not telling you, okay, is that back then, the aristocrats are royals, okay? You weren't allowed to own, everyone knows that you had serfs and you had the king and the nobles, right? And no one could own land except for the nobles and the king, the kingship or whatever. And the serfs were not allowed to own any land. They'd have to rent the land from one of the nobles. The whole thing, that isn't the way it is. That's not the way it is, man. It wasn't that the king, and then they say the king needed these people, these nobles, because they were the rich people. You gotta control the army if you want to control the country. You know what I mean? So you have to have some people on your side that have money. You know what I mean? No, that ain't the way it is. Come on, man. When you have a monarchy, okay, there's only two boxes in your society. Those that have royal blood and those that do not have royal blood, okay? Now, it wasn't that the monarchy and the king could have land and the nobles can have land. No. The nobles are the royals. They're just the lower royals. Just like in any society or in any group, you have a hierarchy. You got the people at the top, people at the bottom, and people in the middle, right? What you would call the aristocrats, or you would call the nobles, they say aren't royal, but yes, if you look in their lineages, yeah, they're all royals. And that's the thing. See, now it makes sense why the nobles got to own land. It's because they were all royal. It wasn't that the monarchy and the rich people were allowed to have land. No, it was the monarchy was allowed to have land and nobody else. You know what I mean? They didn't tell you the aristocrats and the nobles were also part of the monarchy. They were just distant, they were cousins. It'd be a nephew instead of a brother, They weren't as up on the food chain, up on the hierarchy of the monarchy. There's an upper monarchy, the king and his wife and kids. You got the mid monarchs, and then they have power and money, and then you have the lower royals. They don't really get any perks for being royal, but they're rich. You know what I mean? So they call them aristocrats, but they were still royal. They were the same family, the same bloodline. So this family takes over, right? And their bloodline takes over until the lower royals can't stand being lower royals. And so they kill the upper royals. And then the lower royals take over, right? But they want you to believe that it's a different people. No, the aristocrats are the same people as the monarchy in this scenario. Okay, it's just one are upper royals and one are lower royals. And once they become here, right, now the lower royals have killed off the upper royals, so now the lower royals are the upper royals. So they are the monarchy. They're just pretending to be an aristocracy. They're not. They're still a monarchy. They're a monarchy pretending to be an aristocracy. Okay? And then what? It goes down into tyranny again. Because all these words are the same thing. Tyranny, oligarchy, demagogy. I mean, yes, they have different meanings, but they're basically the same thing. Everyone's going crazy nuts, and the leaders are just screwing everyone over and destroying everything, you know, controlling everything. Now, I'll give you another example of how the lower royals just knock off the upper royals and pretend they're not royal. You know, what? In the 1600s, the Great Immigration Migration, yeah. All the people who came over all the lower royals came over to America, right? And all the upper royals were in England, obviously, because they ain't going to leave. Why would they leave? They're the upper royals, right? And then what happens? We think that the Revolutionary War was about this thing that we were going to institute a democracy and no taxation without representation and blah, 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 blah. No, that was the lower royals in America telling the upper royals in England, screw you, we're going to take over just like we did last time. We're tired of being lower royals, and now we have a whole big ocean in between us. What are you going to do about it? And we had our little Revolutionary War, and then we got a democracy. But again, it was just the lower royals from the English monarchy. The first president, George Washington. Let's notice King Edward I, Henry III, all these Magna Carta signers. But 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. He's got the same crowns. 5 of the 7 crowns. Let's do the second president's wife. Oh, there's the king. And I'm not going to keep mentioning these, but there's King Edward I, Henry III, all the Magna Cartas. Here's the 5. Same exact grandfathers. So first president, second president's wife. How about the third president? Same thing. Edward I, Henry III, a bunch of Magna Carta signers. That they all share these. All these grandfathers, they're sharing, and the kings in between. But here's the 5 that I'm talking about. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, how about the fourth? We did the first, second, third, fourth. Let's do the fourth. Over there, Edward I, King Edward III, the Magna Carta signer people. And then look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the kings. Is the 6th president, John Quincy Adams. So let's look at John Quincy Adams, his thing. Let's see how he does. Okay, let's scroll down. Look, he's got King Ed, and these are direct descendants. These are all grandparents. Edward I, Henry III. He's got all these Magna Carta signers, and then he's got the 5. Wait, Charlemagne, Alfred the Great, Robert I, Louis VI, William the Conqueror. The 5 same kings. Okay, this is the first vice president's wife. You can see their son is the 6th U.S. president, so he obviously has the same bloodline. Edward I, Henry III, a bunch of Magna Carta signers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the 7 kings. Here's the second vice president, right, and third president. Edward I, Henry III, a bunch of Magna Carta signers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the kings. Okay, this is the third vice president who killed Alexander Hamilton, who was the first Secretary of Treasury. Charlemagne, Robert I. Only 2 of the 7 kings. But keep in mind, in one of the Magna Carta signers,